the belief that the path that we're currently on is safe and predictable, and making a different choice or changing the career is risky and dangerous. And I was just living that assumption for a very long time, and it made it hard for me to take my step back. One day, my therapist pointed out to me that that was a limiting belief. You know, the assumption that the path that I was on was going to be predictable and safe, and that another path would be more risky, was simply not true or couldn't be proven.
Your coaching philosophy emphasizes self-reflection and values. Why is that such an important starting point?
Yeah, so I'm a palliative care doctor, and I was trained to always start with the person's values. When we live in alignment with our values, we feel happier and more fulfilled. In palliative care, the way that shows up is, I ask, what's important to you right now? What are you afraid of right now? What does a good day look like for you? And then once I understand their values, I can give recommendations about treatments. But if I don't know about their values, I'm just maybe going to give them like a random menu of options, right? Hey, do you want some dialysis? Do you want some tube feeds? Or even worse, I will make recommendations to them based on my own values, kind of assuming that they value the same things that I do. And the minute you start asking someone about their values, you realize people value different things. So my coaching approach is similar. When someone goes through coaching and does some self-reflection about their values, they actually retrain their brain to listen to their own internal voice. When we're a doctor, we have gone through maybe 20 years in this medical school training. For academic physicians, you're on your academic track, you have your mentors, you have all of these external prompts telling you what you value, because you value what the system values, so you can get to that next step of being a doctor. And after doing that for so long, I think physicians stop learning how to listen to what they want. So doing a values clarification activity with a coach should be a really early step in your coaching journey, so that you can just start retraining your brain to hear that inside voice of your own and ask the question, what do I want? And it can be such a scary question for someone who hasn't thought about it for 20 years. But a lot of rich coaching work can happen sitting with that question.
What do you find happens when physicians begin to reconnect with their values instead of just focusing on surviving the system?
I think physicians that have done some reflection about their values and maybe gotten a little bit of validation from a coach, as an example, like, yes, your values are valid and you should listen to them. Small changes can happen first. Somebody might realize that the work-life balance it's not aligned with their vision for what a good life is based on their values. So maybe that person will make a decision to negotiate for less call, or reduce their FTE maybe from 1.0 to 0.8 FTE to start with. And I think those small adjustments can be hugely empowering, and they can be really important for someone who's been going through burnout. Sometimes, though, when people really reflect on their values, something more difficult can happen, which they might realize that they're completely out of alignment with their values. And that might mean making some bigger changes, taking that full step back from a career, redesigning a career, making a pivot. And that work can be a lot harder, and it can also be more rewarding and more empowering.
What fears come up most often when doctors think about leaving traditional roles? Because it's not easy, we trained, as you said, so many years. You have 4 years of medical school, or 4 years of college as a requirement, and then 4 years of medical school, and then 3 to 4 years or more residency, and then you have the fellowship. You have the loans, you have, all these like kind of golden handcuffs, right? So in your experience, what has come up most often, when doctors think about leaving?
Well, financial fear, I think, is probably the most common, or at least it's the one that comes up first, because it's the most obvious. Losing income, managing student loan debt, those can be very real fears. And sometimes, it could be an actual hard stop. If you still have your student loan, you might not be able to take a huge pay cut, for example. But sometimes the financial fear is more nebulous or amorphous. It's like, what if I don't have enough? Or maybe, I've worked with clients who they have some money saved to take a sabbatical or a career break, and they hit their goal, and then suddenly the goalpost moves. Like, well, the market is uncertain, or like, what if it doesn't end up being enough? So I think you have to sort of examine that fear. Is that a real barrier, or is it more like a limiting belief, where you're just, you fear something that you can't possibly know the outcome. There's some uncertainty. Another fear is loss of identity, right? If I'm not Dr. So-and-so at hospital X with, this academic rank, who am I anymore? Will the people in my life still respect me, right? I think another fear is becoming a beginner again. We've gone through a ton of training, and we've been, acting as an expert in whatever field we went into. And there is some comfort in being the expert and like always feeling like you know the right answer. And when you start over, everything's new, and you might ask stupid questions or make mistakes or fail. So I think that fear is really common as well.
You briefly mentioned limiting beliefs that physicians might carry about their careers. What are some of the few that you've seen? Because I think the most common one that I've felt personally is, we go to all of the schooling to learn how to take care of patients, but none of us is good with business or like other things in life. How do you go about counseling clients on that?
Always starting with curiosity. I kind of try to have my antenna up. If I'm hearing something that just doesn't quite match the situation, I want to know, where does that story come from? Who told you that, or whose voice are you hearing when you hear that belief? So, a lot of your audience probably knows this, but for anyone listening, a limiting belief is a belief that is usually negative, something about ourselves, and it's false. And it comes from childhood, and sometimes it comes from our medical training too. But so yeah, the limiting belief that I lived in my own life, actually, this was like a real eye opener for me when I realized that I was carrying this belief around. But the belief that the path that we're currently on is safe and predictable, and making a different choice or changing the career is risky and dangerous. And I was just living that assumption for a very long time, and it made it hard for me to take my step back. One day, my therapist pointed out to me that that was a limiting belief. The assumption that the path that I was on was going to be predictable and safe, and that another path would be more risky, was simply not true or couldn't be proven. And I do think she was right, because when we think about medicine, look at all of the forces that have invaded medicine and made it less safe. Private equity, insurance companies practicing medicine without a license and denying care. These things have changed over the course of my career and made the path that I was on less predictable. And so that is one that I wonder if other people are carrying that around with them as well. And yeah, I liked your example too of I only know how to be a doctor. I don't know how to do anything else, or I'm not good at business. I think is definitely a limiting belief for a lot of us. If we could learn all of the anatomy, all of the diseases and the treatments, we could certainly learn how to get good at business. I think that goes back to that fear of like being a beginner again, and it's uncomfortable. As a coach, how do I help clients navigate those limiting beliefs? I'm listening for them. I'm listening for something that just doesn't sound like it quite matches the situation, and I'm trying to bring it to their level of awareness so that we can interrogate it together a little bit. And I think you can do a lot of this work on your own, but limiting beliefs, I think, are the hardest to navigate by yourself. And this is an area where a coach can be so crucial, because you need someone else hearing your story and questioning it. You are never going to question it for yourself because it's just part of your worldview. So a coach can be really helpful to uncover those limiting beliefs and question them.
So we started encountering many physicians who are exploring entrepreneurship, which is great, consulting, coaching, startups, independent practice. Why do you think this shift is happening?
I'm glad that this shift is happening, first of all. I think that the shift can be explained by a few factors. And I think that the pandemic is a great milestone to think about because it kind of shook our whole world up. I think with the pandemic, a lot of doctors got this feeling that the sort of social contract had been broken. And maybe many of us, myself included, might have had a thought about, like, wow, this really isn't what I signed up for. And then the aftermath of the pandemic, really hoping that things were going to get back to some kind of normalcy, that the system was going to recalibrate itself and things were going to get better. But then, some of those forces that I mentioned started applying more pressure. Those private equity interests, the corporatization of medicine continued. And I do think that a lot of doctors wised up to the reality of the exploitation that's happening and started wanting to make some changes in our own careers to diversify, right? Diversifying your career and having a portfolio career is a great way of balancing out the risk in your life rather than having your entire identity and income wrapped up in one job. You could have some side gigs too, so that you have multiple potential income sources. If you're feeling that burnout, how empowering is it to know that you have another passion project that you're building and you're working on, and maybe somewhere else that you can eventually run towards one day if you do need to take that big step away from medicine. I also think that doctors that do have diverse careers, maybe a non-clinical pursuit or a practice that they're building, a DPC or what have you, outside of the sort of kind of traditional model of care, I think that those are the doctors that are most powerful to fix the broken healthcare system, because the doctors that have the capacity to walk away from an intolerable situation are the ones that have the leverage to, advocate for change and make things better because they're not living in fear of being reliant on one job for their whole life.
Advice do you have for a physician who is burned out and is trying to reclaim their relationship with medicine?
So my advice would be, before you reclaim your relationship with medicine, you have to reclaim your relationship with yourself. However that looks for you, but getting curious about yourself through working with a therapist or working with a coach. Try to get some more insight about your own unconscious beliefs and how they might be contributing and keeping you stuck. I think, of course, working with a coach is a fantastic, maybe my favorite way of getting unstuck, particularly from burnout. And I am a little biased, but the reason that I'm so passionate about coaching is that it can be truly transformational for someone who's feeling stuck, to just have that other person listening to you and validating, the inner voice that's coming out, someone that's saying, yes, I hear that too, and what you're saying is completely valid. How can we turn that into action or turn that into your next step? But for someone who, perhaps isn't ready to take the step of working with a coach, but feels really stuck, ask yourself one question. What is something I can do this week to make my situation 1% better? I think trying to identify that 1% little by little is so much less daunting than like, oh my God, my job sucks. This, I can't do this forever. How am I ever going to do this forever? Finding that 1% is doable for most people.
Great advice. Where can people find you?
So I am Reclaim Physician Coaching. That's my website, reclaimphysiciancoaching.com. I spend time on Instagram, Facebook as well. I have programs specifically for people that are interested in taking a sabbatical. A sabbatical is what I found for myself was the most empowering thing that I've done in my career. If you're not sure if that's right for you, I also have a sabbatical readiness quiz, which is a great place to start if you're just a little bit sabbatical curious.
Any final comments for the audience?
Thank you for listening today. Keep tuning in to groups like this where you can hear other doctors' stories and feel less alone. And become part of a movement to be more empowered as a profession.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks for tuning in to Be Empowered, the podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Stay strong, stay empowered, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.